Hello everyone, I am Chanaka and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to discuss about how you can mash up 3 services using WSO2 API Manager. So the scenario here is you have a client who needs to consume 3 services with a single request. So when the client sends the request to the intermediate product, in this case WSO2 API Manager, it needs to call the services in sequential manner, service 1, service 2 and service 3, and then it should need to provide a response back to the client, an aggregated response. So let's see how we can achieve with WSO2 API Manager. So in the WSO2 API Manager, we create APIs through API definition files. So when you create an API, you always provide an endpoint. So in this scenario, we are going to use the service 1 URL as the endpoint of the API definition. Then calling to the remaining 2 services will be done through a custom mediation sequence. So in this custom mediation sequence, we are going to call the service 2 and service 3 using 2 endpoints. So at the end of the service calls, we are going to aggregate the 3 responses from the 3 services and respond back to the client. So let's see how we can achieve this with WSO2 API Manager. So I have created a GitHub repository and pushed all the artifacts which are used in this video tutorial so that you can try out by your own. So I'll publish the URL of this GitHub repository in the description section. So here I have 3 services which are implemented using Ballerina, and I have the Mashup Sequence, which is the custom mediation sequence. So let's go and try out this scenario. So in my machine, I have the API Manager 260 running and the Analytics Server, API Manager Analytics Server also running, and I am going to start the 3 services, service 1, 2 and 3 using the Ballerina runtime. So here you can see there are 3 services, Bell files. So those are going to be used as the backend services. Let's start these services one by one. Ballerina run. Let's start the record bankruptcy.bell file, which will be starting an endpoint with the 9100 port. Let's start the second service, Ballerina run addmemo.bell. It will start on another port 9101. Let's start the third service, which is create call.bell. So once these 3 services are started, let's try to execute those 3 services using curl command. So here I already have this curl command typed in here. So I am calling alright, so I am calling the curl with the post method with a sample payload. So the URL is 9100/record bankruptcy info. So it will give me a sample response like this, ID, status and some information. Then if I call the second service, which is running on 9101 with the /addmemo context, it will give a simple response saying memo added. So if I call similarly the third service, it will give me a different response. It's running on 9102. It's giving me ID and status. So the ultimate goal of creating the API is concatenating these three responses when I send a request to the API, which is exposed by the WSO2 API Manager. So let's go and create an API in the API Manager. So I am going to go to the API Manager console and I am going to grab the publisher URL, and then I am using this URL to log into the API publisher. So I am logging in with the standard username and password. Here you can see there are many APIs which I have created for demonstration purposes. So let's go and create a new API. I am selecting the design a new REST API from scratch. So let's name this API as Mashup Demo, and we can say Mashup Demo as the context, and we can give a version. So if we want, we can add some add tag. Here we can add a resource URL pattern, and if we need multiple resources we can add, let's say /. Alright, so let's go to the next stage of API creation and provide the URL of the first service, which is the 9100/record bankruptcy info. So this is the URL of the first service which we are going to call. So then we need to enable the message mediation, and here what actually happens is when the request comes into the API, it calls the first service and the response will come to the outflow. So that is where we need to upload the custom mediation sequence. Let's click on upload outflow and select the mediation sequence. So it is already here. I have pulled the Git artifacts into my local machine. So I have the mashup sequence.xml. So I am going to upload it. Now we have added the endpoint information and the custom mediation sequence. Let's go to the next step and finish the API creation by selecting subscription tiers. You can keep the other information as it is. Alright, we have created the API Mashup Demo v1. Let's go to the API store and try to consume this API. So in the API store you can see the API is available, Mashup Demo v1. To consume this API we need to have a valid user account. Let's log into the API store with the admin username and password, and first we need to subscribe to this API using an existing application, or if you want to create a new application you can create a new one. So in this case I am going to use an application called Mashup app, and I can subscribe to the gold tier. Once I subscribe, it will show me the subscriptions available under that application. So here this is the Mashup Demo v1 which we have just created, and it has the subscription for this application. Let's go to the API console. So I have already generated the production keys for this application, so it already come up here. So let's try to execute this API. So we can send a sample payload. This would be fine for a sample payload. So here one of the things, let's try to execute this. Yeah, if I execute this, it will basically give me the curl command. So the response is not showing due to some certificate issue. Let's go and execute this command in curl so that we can see the actual response. So here if you see this curl command, it calls the Mashup Demo API version 1 with the bearer token with a sample payload. So let's execute this, and here you can see the response which aggregates three results: the result 1, result 2 and result 3. So it has aggregated all three responses and responded back to the client. So that's how you can execute this API. So let's go to the GitHub repo and try to understand the mashup sequence. So in the mashup sequence, what we are doing is basically first what we are doing is we are logging the response message of the first API call to the first service. This is for information purpose only. Then we are basically storing this response in a property called response1. So we are using the enrich mediator to store the response message into this property. Then we are preparing the payload for the second service call. So here you can see this is a sample JSON payload with some information, and then we are calling that second service using the call mediator with this endpoint. Then we are getting the second response, and this response we are logging that response and then again storing the second response into a property called response2. Then we are creating the request for the third service call with some information and call the third service here. Finally, we are storing the response 3 from this third service call and enriching it to the response 3 property. So at the end of these executions, we are creating a new payload with this payload factory mediator with all the results. So the structure is custom. We defined results, result 1, 2, 3, and we are giving the variables which we stored the responses here, $1, $2, $3, and give those as arguments here. Here you can see the response 1, response 2 and response 3 properties are referred into this payload, and at the end we are responding back to the client. So that's how you can implement an API mashup quickly with WSO2 API Manager with a simple custom mediation. You can refer to this GitHub repository to get all the ballerina files and the mashup sequence. If you have any questions, just put those questions as comments below in the YouTube video. Thanks for joining in. We'll catch you up with another video.